Guys, boxing gossip here. Hope everyone's doing well. Gonna keep this video shorter than the usual ones because if you can't already tell, I've got a cold from hell and speaking isn't as much fun. But I've had a number of messages about the David Price Christian Hamer fight, so just wanted to put some brief thoughts up on that. For those of you who don't know, this fight has been added to the Eubank Jr. versus Reynold Quinlan undercard. That fight, by the way, is now at Kensington Olympia. It's no longer at the Leisure Centre. And it's also got Kid Galahad and John Ryder versus Adam Etches on the undercard. So it's actually not as bad a bill as I initially feared it would be. The pay-per-view price as well has been set at $12.95, which is some 36% below the 20 quid that Eubank Senior quoted via Twitter. So this hasn't actually developed, don't get me wrong, I'm still not saying it's a pay-per-view card, but it hasn't actually developed into as bad a night for boxing as I anticipated it would have done. You know, better venue, lower price, far better undercard. You know, I did not think the Eubanks would be getting, the likes of David Price on the undercard. And David Price, whether you rate him or not, he's a big name, he's got a decent profile, and he's a heavyweight. Ryder Etches, I know neither of those are superstars, but for me that's a 50-50 fight. That's actually got the potential to be an entertaining matchup. So even though I wouldn't say I'm necessarily a fan of either guy, that's actually exactly the right kind of fight that both men should be in at this stage of their career. And I've actually been saying on Eddie Hearn cards in the past, these are the type of fights we want to see John Ryder in, not just 8 or 10 rounders against international opponents who we haven't heard of, if that makes sense. Anyway, let's talk about Price versus Hammer, because this is what this video was supposed to be about. I do think this is excellent matchmaking, because I think Christian Hamer is the highest rated heavyweight. He just made my heavyweight top 20, for example. He's the highest rated heavyweight who poses the lowest risk over David Price. In fact, he may be one of the only guys who made my top 20 who I'd make David Price a favourite over. And I haven't sat down and worked that out, but off the top of my head, there's not too many guys in that top 20 list I'd pick David Price as a favourite to beat. But I do pick David Price as a favourite to beat Christian Hamer. Hamer's a decent guy. He's a solid enough fighter. But there's levels to this game, and we saw what happened when he fought Tyson Fury. We saw what happened earlier on in his career when he fought Marius Wack. Both times he came up against bigger opponents, and both times he got stopped. Now, Tyson Fury and Marius Wack, neither of those guys, they can both punch. Neither of those guys are known as the biggest heavyweight punchers. Tyson Fury stopped him brutally by wearing him down. Marius Wack iced him. One punch knockout, knocked him out. Now, I know Marius Wack, has had a bit of an up and down career, but he's never been known as a thunderous puncher, and, he absolutely iced Hamer out. So, Price is going to go into this fight. He's got a massive height, reach, range advantage. He's got a big power advantage, and he's going up against the guy who has been shown can be hurt quite easily in heavyweight boxing by two guys who I consider to be less powerful punchers than David Price. So for me, David Price is a real favourite in this fight. David Price's weakness, as ever, is about someone who's going to put the pressure on him, force the pace, get up on his chest. He doesn't know what to do when that happens. Christian Hamer will look to do that, being the shorter heavyweight. He'll look to come in low, he'll look to close the gap. He's not going to want to stand there and jab off with David Price from range. So the key test here is, has David Price and has David Colwell in his corner been able to do something about that David Price jab? Because if David Price starts out with this ludicrous, pouring jab, that wouldn't scare away a featherweight, let alone a heavyweight, then Christian Hamer's going to get right up on the inside. Christian Hamer's going to be able to pour the pressure on David Price, and the fight could become a 50-50 fight, or even a fight 75-25 in Christian Hamer's performance. If David Price can get that jab pumping, keep it, pump it out, stick it in Hamer's face, deter him, use it to keep him at range, then for me, Hamer's limited. He's not the fastest on his feet. I know he's got some amateur pedigree, but he's not the slickest of boxers. And for me, if that does happen, David Price should be able to have target practice with Christian Hamer. The reason I rate Christian Hamer so highly is because of his win over Erkan Tepe. And that's an interesting form line, because obviously Erkan Tepe famously knocked out David Price, and Christian Hamer has just beaten Erkan Tepe. So I can see there's a nice storyline as to why they've chosen Hamer as the opponent. But the truth is, no one knows how good Erkan Tepe was in that Christian Hamer fight, because the Erkan Tepe who famously knocked out David Price, as we know, was off his head on performance-enhancing drugs, whereas it would appear he was clean for the fight against Christian Hamer. So it's unclear whether the Erkan Tepe Christian Hamer beat that night was really up to much. For me, when Hamer stepped up against opponents other than that fight, he's looked dubious in terms of his levels of quality. So I suspect David Price will win the fight. With David Price, he's never one to bet your house on. He's never one to trust with your life savings. And I think it's fair to say, having looked at David Price's box track, a win over Christian Hamer would be by far the most meaningful win of David Price's career. I mean, who's the best name he's beaten? Audley Harrison, Sam Sexton. I think a win here over Christian Hamer is the biggest heavyweight win of Price's career. And I think if you look at the two guys, at the minute, Christian Hamer's actually got the better wins on his record. So I think it's an interesting fight from that perspective. I think it's sensible matchmaking, because the risk reward is there. This is a fight that's going to get David Price ranked a bit higher. It's a fight that's going to get him on ITV, which is going to be a good platform. It's going to be good for him in that sense. And it's also a fight where he has a lot of advantages. I actually don't think Christian Hamer is the biggest puncher out there. Don't get me wrong, Tony Thompson isn't the biggest puncher out there, and he stopped David Price. So I'm not saying you've got to be some Deontay Wilder or David Haye style puncher to knock out David Price. But, I don't think Christian Hamer poses the biggest obvious threat. I think the key here is, can David Price use his feet and use his jab to keep Christian Hamer at range? An obvious bit of form for David Price to be watching is the Tyson Fury-Christian Hamer matchup. Now, I'm not suggesting that David Price is overnight going to be able to develop Tyson Fury-esque footwork, but what we've seen recently is David Price coming in at 20 stone, being ultra static, ultra robotic, and just consisting with that pouring, pointless jab. If he does that, quite genuinely, he loses some of his natural advantages in this fight against Christian Hamer. Because Christian Hamer's going to want to walk him down. Christian Hamer's going to want to have the fight up close. He's not going to want to, box from range. So for me, that's the key test. And at this stage of his career, having suffered all those losses, if Price can't make that adaptation, then I'd say, unfortunately, his career is over. Because a loss to Christian Hamer, having lost twice to Tony Thompson, lost to Erkan Tepe, is not a fight for me Price can come back from, unless he's content with maybe dropping down sort of English title level or area title level, that sort of, or becoming an opponent perhaps. If he's got ambitions to fight at, let's say, Commonwealth, British, Euro, world level, then he's got to be beating a guy like Christian Hamer. Christian Hamer, I rank him in my top 20 because of that win over Tepe, but I'm going to be honest with you, I'll pick Chisora to beat him, I'll pick Dillian White to beat him, I'll pick Hughie Fury to absolutely school him. I'll probably pick the likes of, maybe the likes of David Allen, Nathan Gorman, Dominic Akinlade. I'm probably picking those guys about 50, making them 50-50 in fights with him. I've got to say, I don't rate Christian Hamer. So I think it's one where it's clever matchmaking on behalf of David Price's team. And I just about think he's going to have enough, but this is a key acid test for me. And if David Price can't keep Christian Hamer off him, then I don't think he's got any chance of going anywhere in heavyweight boxing. And if he can't keep Christian Hamer off him, despite the fact Hamer isn't the biggest puncher in the world, he is a heavyweight, and David Price has got that chin, and it is a fight that Price could lose. I said this wasn't going to be a long video, but as always, I've got started and I've been rambling. Ryder versus Adam Etches. I've never really fully bought into either guy. I don't see an obvious favourite here. I maybe make Etches the slightly bigger puncher and slightly bigger guy, and Ryder maybe the slightly more school of the two. I see it as a 50-50 matchup. I don't have an initial lean as to who I'd pick. I think it's the right matchup for both guys at this sort of stage of their careers. I'm viewing it as like a crossroads type, but it's an interesting fight. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. The pay-per-view is £12.95 and you've got these two fights on the undercard. Who now will be buying this pay-per-view? Would you make a Price Hamer? What percentage chance do you give Hamer of course upsetting the apple cart here? Do you agree with me that it's good matchmaking? And what about Etches Ryder? Who are you picking in that one? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you've enjoyed this video, take the time to hit the thumbs up button. And as always, if you're new to the channel, please hit subscribe. Thanks for watching.